The mysterious SOS signal. The deep silence of space was suddenly broken by a strange signal, faint and distant, yet unmistakably urgent. It was a call for help, but not from anyone the galaxy had ever heard of before. The signal came from an unknown part of the galaxy, from a place no one had ever ventured. The message was simple, a series of broken words, but the tone was clear: desperation. In the vastness of space, the Deathworlder fleet was one of the most powerful and feared forces. These warriors came from the harshest planets, where survival meant strength and cunning. They had seen things that would break lesser beings, monsters, warlords, creatures that defied nature itself. The Deathworlders had fought countless battles, but this message was different. It wasn't the usual distress signal from a ship in trouble or a planet under siege by pirates. It was something else entirely. The fleet's commander, General Carrick, sat in the command room, his sharp eyes focused on the flickering display in front of him. The message was weak, scrambled by the interference of space, but there was no mistaking the sense of fear in the voice that had sent it. The message repeated over and over: help, please. The lost cannot escape. Death. Help. Us. Please. The words were fragmented, desperate, but the message was clear. Someone, or something, was in grave danger. Carrick's mind raced. He had received many distress calls over the years, but this one felt different. The tone was full of fear, not of death, but of something worse, something that even the bravest warriors might hesitate to face. He turned to his crew, each of them hardened veterans, their faces tense with the same realization. This was no ordinary mission. This was a call for help, but there was more to it. Bring up the source of the signal, Carrick ordered. The crew worked quickly, pulling up the coordinates on the holographic display. The location was far beyond the usual trade routes, near a cluster of unexplored stars. It was a region of space known for being difficult to navigate, filled with cosmic anomalies, black holes, and radiation fields that could tear apart even the most advanced ships. The Deathworlders had never ventured there, and for good reason. It was a place of mystery, a place where only the brave, or the foolish, dared to go. As Carrick stared at the map, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What kind of beings lived in that distant part of space, and what could have caused them to send such a desperate plea for help? The thought lingered in his mind, a nagging question that he couldn't shake. He turned to his second-in-command, Captain Vrax. "Prepare the fleet," he said. "We're going to answer this SOS." Vrax nodded, though his face betrayed a hint of doubt. "Sir, are we sure about this? We don't know what we're walking into. This could be a trap." "I don't care," Carrick replied, his voice cold and steady. "We've fought worse than this." The message was clear. Someone is in trouble, and we have the power to help. Prepare the fleet. Within minutes, the Deathworlder fleet was in motion, its massive ships cutting through space with unmatched speed and precision. As they moved toward the unknown location, the fleet's sensors scanned the surrounding area for any signs of danger. But all was quiet. Too quiet. The farther they traveled, the more the sense of unease grew. The stars seemed to fade as they entered the region of space where the SOS had originated. The space around them grew darker, the stars farther apart, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The signal had led them to this place, but what awaited them on the other side? "Increase the scan range," Carrick ordered, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. "We need to know what we're dealing with." As the fleet continued its journey, the crew worked tirelessly, scanning for any signs of life or movement. It wasn't until they were nearly at the coordinates that they picked up something, a faint, pulsating energy reading, unlike anything they had encountered before. It was coming from a nearby planet, one that hadn't been charted before. The planet was small, covered in dense forests and oceans, with a thin atmosphere that barely supported life. But there was something about it that made Carrick's instincts tingle. The energy reading was unlike anything he had ever seen. "Sir," Vrax said, his voice laced with concern. "We've detected something strange. The planet's atmosphere is unstable, and the energy readings, they're off the charts. It's like something is feeding off the planet's core." Karak's eyes narrowed. What kind of power could do that? Before Vrax could answer, the comms crackled to life, and a voice echoed through the speakers. It was the same voice from the SOS, but now it sounded weaker, more frantic. "Please, hurry. They're coming. They're unstoppable." The message cut off abruptly, and the fleet fell into a heavy silence. The air was thick with tension, and everyone on board knew that whatever awaited them on that planet was not something they could easily face. But the Deathworlders were warriors, and warriors did not back down. "Get us to the planet," Karak ordered, his voice firm. The fleet moved forward, closer to the unknown, to the mysterious SOS that had called them here. The crew could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them, but they pushed forward, ready for whatever awaited them. They were Deathworlders, and they would face this new threat head-on. But as they descended into the atmosphere, they couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much darker, something that would test even their strength and courage in ways they could not imagine. The true danger was still hidden, waiting to be revealed. The alien race in danger. The Deathworlder fleet descended into the atmosphere of the mysterious planet, its ships cutting through the dense clouds, pushing through the fog that seemed to cling to the very air. General Karak stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the planet below. From space, it appeared to be a peaceful world, full of blue oceans, green forests, and sprawling plains. It seemed almost idyllic. But Karak knew better than to trust appearances. There was something deeply unsettling about this place, something hidden beneath the surface. As the fleet touched down on the planet's surface, the ground trembled slightly, and the atmosphere felt eerily still. The peaceful alien world, which had once seemed so serene, now felt like a trap. Karak's instincts told him they were being watched, but by what? The peaceful beings who had sent the SOS, or something else. The moment the landing gear hit the ground, the ramp to the lead ship opened. A group of alien beings stood waiting on the planet's surface. They were unlike anything Karak had ever seen. Their skin was pale and smooth, their features delicate, with large, wide eyes that shimmered like pools of liquid silver. Their bodies were slight and graceful, moving with an elegance that spoke of a life lived in harmony with their world. They were fragile, almost ethereal. The Deathworlders, with their imposing, muscular frames, towering over the aliens, couldn't help but look out of place. The leader of the aliens stepped forward. Her name was Lyra, and she spoke with a soft but urgent voice. "Thank you for coming. We are the Zorathi, a peaceful race, and we never expected to be in danger. But now we are all that is left of our kind." Karak's gaze sharpened. "What happened? Why did you send the SOS?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, her silver eyes glistening with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "We were a peaceful race, living in harmony with the planet. But then, a dark force arrived, creatures unlike anything we've ever encountered. They came from the dark corners of the galaxy. We tried to defend ourselves, but our weapons are no match for theirs. They are unstoppable." Karak felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The aliens, though graceful and seemingly frail, were clearly in a state of panic. The thought of an enemy so powerful that even the mighty Zorathi could not defend themselves was a sobering one. "What are these creatures?" Karak asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. "They call themselves the Vorlons," Lyra explained. "They are predators. They hunt for sport, for power. They have no mercy. They move in the shadows, striking without warning, and they seem to be getting stronger. They have destroyed most of our cities, wiped out our defenses, and we are now hiding in the last remaining safe zone we have left. We can't survive much longer. We have no way to fight back." The more Karak listened, the darker the story became. He knew the Zorathi were peaceful, their race not built for war. But the fact that they had been wiped out so quickly by an enemy they couldn't even identify, let alone fight, made him uneasy. Who or what were these Vorlons? And how could they be stopped? Before he could ask more, a sudden loud crackle echoed through the air. Carrick's eyes shot up, and he saw movement, shadows darting across the land, fast and unpredictable. His soldiers instantly went on high alert. They could feel it too, the predator presence. Lyra's voice shook as she spoke again. They are here. They never stop hunting. Please, we beg of you, help us. Carrick's hand instinctively went to the weapon at his side. He had fought countless enemies, from alien warlords to deadly creatures, but the way Lyra spoke, the fear in her voice, it was different. The Vorlons were not just invaders. They were predators, and the Zorathi were their prey. And the Deathworlders, with all their power, had to face an unknown enemy, unlike anything they had encountered before. Stay close to the fleet, Carrick ordered, his voice firm. We will handle this. But I need to know everything. The Vorlons, they have to have a weakness. Every predator does. Lyra's eyes met his, her expression a mix of hope and despair. I don't know. All we know is that they don't fear us. They only fear one thing. The light. The light. Carrick repeated, confused. What do you mean by that? Lyra looked down, her voice barely a whisper. When we first encountered them, we thought they were like us, beings of peace, seeking refuge. But they weren't. They came from a dark place, a place where light is scarce. The Vorlons, they thrive in darkness. The only thing that keeps them at bay is intense light, bright, overwhelming light. It hurts them. The general thought for a moment. His mind raced. The Vorlons feared light. That could be an advantage. But how would they use that knowledge against such an enemy? The Deathworlders had the strength to fight, but they needed more than just brute force. They needed strategy. We'll need to move fast, Carrick said, his voice hardening with resolve. Prepare the fleet. We need to draw them into the open, and when we do, we'll flood them with light. Lyra nodded, but there was still a tremor of fear in her eyes. Please, hurry. There are more of them now. They've surrounded us. The Deathworlder commander turned to his fleet, ready to do whatever it took. They had come here to answer the SOS, to protect the innocent, and they would not fail. But as they began to prepare, Carrick couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. What kind of enemies were the Vorlons? And could they truly be defeated by light alone? As the Deathworlders readied themselves for the coming fight, the planet around them grew darker, as if the sky itself was closing in. The predators were drawing closer, and in that moment, Carrick knew that this mission was far from over. It was only just beginning. The first contact with the aliens. The air on the planet felt heavy, thick with tension, as the Deathworlders prepared to face the unknown. General Carrick stood in front of his soldiers, his gaze focused on the horizon, where dark clouds swirled ominously above the alien city. The Zorathi had led them to their last stronghold, a sprawling complex built into the heart of a vast jungle. From the distance, it seemed like a peaceful settlement, its buildings elegant and simple, nestled among the towering trees. But Carrick knew that peace here was an illusion. The quiet was broken by the sudden howling of wind, a prelude to the predator's approach. The Deathworlders began moving out, their heavy boots making deep imprints in the soft earth as they followed the Zorathi to the heart of the city. Each of them was alert, every sense on high alert. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the trees swayed as if something invisible was moving through them. Lyra, the Zorathi leader, led them into the heart of the city with an air of urgency. Her silver eyes flickered with worry, and the peaceful nature that had once defined her people seemed to be fading with every passing moment. They were no longer the serene beings of beauty and grace. They were survivors, their fear evident in every step they took. We have made our stand here, Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly. We thought we could protect ourselves, But we were wrong. The Vorlons do not fear us. We have nowhere left to run. Karak nodded grimly. You were right to call for help. You will not stand alone in this fight. The city's architecture was unlike anything Karak had ever seen. The Zorathi had blended their buildings with nature, creating structures that were part organic, part technological, seamlessly integrating with the environment. The trees that surrounded them were ancient, their massive trunks thick and gnarled. It was beautiful, but also unsettling. In this eerie silence, it felt like the planet itself was holding its breath. As they entered the main square, the air seemed to grow colder. Karak felt a shift in the atmosphere, an oppressive weight hanging over them. The Zorathi warriors, once so graceful and calm, now stood in tight groups, their eyes darting nervously. The Deathworlders, however, stood strong and resolute, their weapons ready. They were ready for battle, no matter what it might bring. Karak glanced back at his fleet. They were waiting, watching, ready to spring into action at any moment. But the Vorlons had not yet shown themselves. Where were they? Lyra spoke again, her voice now barely above a whisper. We tried to fight, but they are unlike any enemies we have ever faced. They are shadows, creatures that move without sound. When they strike, it is swift and deadly. They do not take prisoners. Karak's brow furrowed. Shadows. It was an unsettling description, but it made sense. The Vorlons had been described as predators, creatures of darkness. But how could shadows be defeated? Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. The sky above grew darker still, the clouds swirling faster as if they were being pulled by an unseen force. And then, the first scream tore through the air. It was the sound of a Zorathi warrior being taken, a cry that echoed in the hearts of every Deathworlder present. Without hesitation, Karak barked orders. Prepare for combat. Move out. The Deathworlders formed a defensive perimeter, their advanced weapons raised and ready. But even as they scanned the area, there was nothing. Nothing visible. Nothing to target. The shadows in the trees shifted, but they were no longer just shadows. Something was moving in them. Something fast. Something deadly. Then, without warning, the first Vorlon emerged. It was a blur of motion, a dark, twisting figure that appeared out of nowhere, leaping from the trees with unnatural speed. Its form was monstrous, humanoid but twisted, with elongated limbs and sharp, glistening teeth. It moved like a phantom, its body flowing in and out of the darkness, making it nearly impossible to target. One of the Deathworlders fired, his weapon discharging with a thunderous roar. The blast should have obliterated anything in its path, but the Vorlon vanished into the shadows before the shot could make contact. Another warrior fired, and the creature reappeared, too close for comfort, its clawed hands reaching for the soldier's throat. The Deathworlder fought back, but the Vorlon was too fast, too strong. It slashed at the soldier, leaving deep gashes across his armor before vanishing back into the darkened trees. The battle had begun. Karak was momentarily stunned, not by the speed or power of the Vorlons, but by their ability to blend into the shadows. They seemed to melt into the darkness, becoming one with the night. The Deathworlders could not fight what they could not see. Light. Karak shouted, suddenly understanding. Flood the area with light. Now. His soldiers quickly activated their energy generators, and in an instant, the clearing was flooded with blinding light. The Vorlons hissed and recoiled, their twisted forms writhing in pain as the light burned through the darkness that had once been their shield. For the first time, the creatures were visible. They were terrifying, nightmarish. Their dark, sinewy bodies were covered in thick armor-like skin, their faces hideous and contorted with hunger. The Deathworlders fired again, their weapons now targeting the visible forms of the Vorlons. The first few shots hit their marks, and the creatures howled in pain. But there were more, dozens more, emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing with a feral hunger. They had been waiting for this moment. And now, They would not stop until every last Zorathi was dead. Carrick's heart pounded. This was no ordinary battle. The Deathworlders were facing an enemy that thrived in darkness, an enemy that could strike at any moment, and an enemy that seemed to fear nothing. But the light was their weapon now, and Carrick knew one thing for sure. The Deathworlders would not back down. The fight for this planet, for the survival of the Zorathi, was just beginning. The hidden threat revealed. The battle raged on around them, the air thick with the sound of weapons firing and creatures howling in pain. The Vorlons, though momentarily weakened by the intense light, were far from defeated. They seemed to adapt quickly, their dark forms flitting in and out of the light, too fast for the Deathworlders to catch. Carrick's heart pounded as he led his troops deeper into the heart of the Zorathi city. The light from their energy generators pierced the darkness, but it was clear that even with this advantage, the Deathworlders were barely holding their own. The Vorlons were relentless, and their speed made them unpredictable. The Zorathi warriors, though brave, could do little more than cower in the safety of the light, helpless to fight back effectively. Carrick's mind raced. There had to be something more, some deeper secret about these Vorlons. The way they fought, their ability to blend into shadows, it wasn't normal. They weren't just predators, they were something else. Something more. General, Captain Vrax's voice crackled through the comms. There's something strange happening. The Vorlons, they're not just attacking randomly. They're converging on something. Something at the center of the city. Carrick's instincts flared. What's at the center of the city? Vrax paused, his voice filled with uncertainty. We don't know, but there's a structure there, one we didn't notice before. It's hidden beneath the ground. It's old, ancient, even. Carrick's eyes narrowed. An ancient structure, the place they're drawn to. Exactly, Vrax replied. It's as if the Vorlons are being guided to it, as if they know something we don't. Carrick gritted his teeth. He had suspected there was more to this planet than met the eye. The Zorathi were not a warlike species, and there had to be some reason why the Vorlons had come to their peaceful world. Could this mysterious structure be the key? Move towards the center of the city, Carrick ordered. We need to find out what they're after. As they made their way deeper into the city, Carrick couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The buildings grew more ancient the closer they got, their stone walls worn by time, and the air grew heavier with each step. The trees seemed to grow taller, their twisted roots creeping over the cracked stone streets like tendrils, as if nature itself was reclaiming the city. When they reached the heart of the city, they found it. A massive stone structure, ancient and covered in vines, stood before them. It was a temple, but not of the kind the Deathworlders were used to. This wasn't a place of worship. It was a fortress. The architecture was alien, unlike anything Carrick had ever seen, with towering pillars and intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. There was a strange glow emanating from within the temple, as if something powerful was contained inside. Carrick's eyes swept over the structure. The Vorlons had stopped their attacks and were now circling the temple, as if waiting for something. He felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Whatever this was, it was the key to understanding the Vorlons' behavior. But what had brought them here? As the Deathworlders approached, a low, guttural growl echoed from within the temple. It was the sound of something. Waiting. Carrick signaled for his troops to stop, his instincts telling him that charging in blindly could be their downfall. Stay alert, Carrick said, his voice low. Something is inside. The ground beneath their feet trembled once again, this time more violently. The glow from within the temple flickered, and the Deathworlders instinctively raised their weapons. The Vorlons began to move, their twisted forms darting around the temple's perimeter, agitated and restless. Carrick narrowed his eyes. This isn't just an ordinary temple. It's a prison. A sudden realization struck him. The Zorathi had said the Vorlons were predators, but they weren't just hunting. They were searching for something, and this temple was the source. It was as if the Vorlons were drawn here by an ancient force, something buried deep beneath the planet's surface. The light, the only thing that could drive them back, wasn't just a weapon against them. It was a protection, a barrier keeping something far worse contained. The doors of the temple creaked and groaned, as if something inside was stirring, trying to break free. And then, the truth hit Karak with the force of a hammer. The Vorlons weren't the true threat. They were just the guards. The true danger lay within the temple, in whatever force had been imprisoned there. The Deathworlders had only scratched the surface of this mystery. The Vorlons were not native to this planet. They were not even the true enemies. They were there to keep something else from escaping, something far darker and more terrifying. As the ground shook again, the temple's doors began to open. From the darkness beyond, something stirred, a presence so malevolent that it made the air grow cold. Karak's mind raced. They hadn't come to this planet to fight the Vorlons. They had come to stop an ancient evil from being unleashed on the galaxy. The Vorlons had been the first warning. The true battle was about to begin, and the Deathworlders would be forced to face the unimaginable. The battle for survival. The silence after the temple doors opened was deafening. The Deathworlders, normally fearless, could feel an unspoken tension in the air, the kind that came before the most dangerous of battles. The glow from within the temple pulsed, growing stronger with every passing second, like the heartbeat of something ancient, waiting to be freed. The Vorlons, who had been circling the structure just moments ago, now retreated into the shadows, their feral eyes trained on the temple's entrance. Even they seemed afraid of whatever lay beyond. Karak stepped forward, his grip tightening around his weapon. His soldiers followed, the thrum of their pulse rifles filling the air. But it was clear that their usual confidence was wavering. Whatever was inside that temple was something they were not prepared for. And yet, they had no choice. The Zorathi were depending on them. "This is it," Karak said under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. "Stay close, stay sharp. We're going in." The doors creaked open further, revealing a dark, hollow space. The inside of the temple was vast, the ceiling lost in shadow, and the floor covered in thick, ancient dust. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of decay, as if the temple itself had been abandoned for millennia. Yet, despite the decay, something about the space felt alive, as though the temple had been waiting for this moment for centuries. As the Deathworlders cautiously advanced, the glow from within grew brighter, revealing strange carvings on the walls. These weren't the Zorathi's designs. These were symbols older than anything Karak had ever seen, symbols that pulsed with an eerie energy, filling the room with an oppressive hum. The deeper they ventured, the more the hum seemed to grow, like the ancient temple was alive and aware of their presence. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and the air itself seemed to shift. Karak's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. The ancient evil was waking. The temple walls cracked, and with a thunderous roar, a shadow began to rise from the center of the room. The Deathworlders raised their weapons in unison, but Karak waved them down. There was no enemy to target yet, just a growing, oppressive presence that filled the room. From the darkness, a form began to take shape. It was massive, towering over the Deathworlders, its form shifting in and out of existence like liquid darkness. The glow that had filled the temple intensified as the figure slowly solidified. The presence of the creature was so overwhelming that it felt like the very fabric of reality was bending around it. This was no ordinary being. It was something beyond comprehension, beyond anything the Deathworlders had ever encountered. Karak's mind raced. This was the true enemy. The Vorlons were merely the guardians, the sentinels meant to keep this thing from breaking free. But now it was awake. The creature, now fully formed, loomed over them. A twisted, gargantuan being, its body made of shifting shadows and dark energy, with eyes like burning coals, glowing bright with malevolent intent. Its form seemed to stretch and flicker, as if it wasn't entirely bound by the laws of space and time. Its mere presence seemed to distort the world around it, creating an unnatural sense of dread that seeped into the hearts of even the most hardened warriors. It spoke in a voice that wasn't heard but felt, reverberating deep within the minds of those who stood before it. "You dare disturb me. The reckoning has come." The Deathworlders staggered back, their fear momentarily taking hold. Carrick's throat tightened. This wasn't just some ancient force. This was something more. A creature that could bend the fabric of reality itself. A being that could shatter minds and break the very laws of nature. "We have no choice," Carrick muttered, rallying his soldiers. "We fight. We survive." The air crackled with energy as the creature's massive, shadowy form shifted, tendrils of darkness reaching out toward the Deathworlders. They fired, their weapons lighting up the room with blinding flashes, but the creature seemed to absorb the energy, the blasts vanishing into its body like it was nothing more than mist. "Light!" Carrick shouted, a moment of clarity piercing through the chaos. "We need more light. Flood the room." The soldiers immediately activated their backup energy generators, unleashing bright beams of light into the temple. The light lashed at the creature, causing it to recoil with a roar of rage. But even as the light pushed it back, the creature writhed, dark tendrils extending from its body, reaching for the soldiers, intent on consuming them. The ground cracked open beneath their feet as the temple seemed to come alive, shifting and warping, as if the entire structure was part of the creature's will. The Deathworlders were pushed to their limits, their weapons firing relentlessly, but the creature's form seemed impervious to their attacks. The light was the only thing that kept it at bay, but the beams were starting to flicker under the intensity of the creature's power. "We're not going to hold it back for long," Vrax shouted, his voice trained. "We need to find its weakness." Carrick's eyes scanned the temple, the eerie glow still pulsing around them. The creature's form was still shifting, like a living nightmare. And then it hit him, the symbols on the walls, the ones that had glowed in time with the creature's rise. He moved toward the carvings, his mind working quickly. There had to be something in the temple that could stop it, something that bound the creature here. As he reached out to touch one of the glowing symbols, a surge of energy shot through him, and the world seemed to twist around him. The symbols were more than just decoration. They were a prison, a seal that had kept the creature contained for millennia. With a sudden realization, Carrick yelled, "The symbols, they're the key. We have to activate them again. Use the light to recharge them." His soldiers, though battered, understood instantly. They began redirecting the light toward the symbols, pouring every ounce of energy into the glowing carvings. As the light intensified, the symbols flared brighter, and the creature screamed in fury, its form flickering and warping. It was working, but not for long. Carrick's heart pounded in his chest as the creature's form began to collapse, pulled back into the dark void from which it had come. The Deathworlder's light was doing its job, but the seal was weakening with every moment. They had to act fast. "We finish this, now," Carrick roared, leading the charge as they concentrated the full power of their weapons and light into the symbols. With one final, blinding explosion of light, the creature was sucked back into the darkness, its screams echoing through the temple as the walls began to collapse. The temple's ancient seal had been reawakened, trapping the creature once again. But for how long? Would it stay sealed, or would it return? As the temple crumbled around them, the Deathworlders retreated, the Zorathi warriors following close behind. They had survived, but at what cost? The true battle was over for now, but the shadows of the galaxy were long, and the forces they had faced today would never be easily forgotten. A twist of fate. The Deathworlders emerged from the crumbling temple, their footsteps heavy and slow, the weight of the battle settling on their shoulders. The distant hum of the temple's collapse faded into the eerie quiet of the jungle around them. The air, once thick with tension, now felt hollow, as though the land itself was holding its breath after the fight. General Carrick stood at the edge of the temple's entrance, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Zorathi, though alive, were broken. Their world, their people, had been shattered, and the survivors could do little more than watch in silence as the last remnants of their once beautiful city fell into ruin. The Deathworlders had done what they could, but even victory came at a cost. They had driven the creature back into the shadows, at least for now, but there was no real peace in the aftermath. Karak's mind raced. The battle had been won, but the true nature of the creature, the forces that had awakened in that temple, left him uneasy. The Vorlons had been only a warning, a sentinel guarding something far worse. But what else could be out there? How many other creatures like that one were waiting to break free? General, Vrax's voice pulled him from his thoughts. The captain stood at his side, his face weary but resolute. We've taken a hard hit. We lost a lot of good men, but the Zorathi are safe. For now. For now, Karak repeated, his voice grim. But what about the future, Vrax? That creature wasn't a simple beast. It was something older, something ancient. This world isn't the end of it. Before Vrax could respond, an urgent message crackled over the comms. The voice was sharp and filled with distress. It was from the fleet, far above them in orbit. General Karak, this is the fleet. We've detected an anomaly. Something is coming toward us. Fast. It's not a ship. It's something else, something massive. And it's closing in quickly. Karak's blood ran cold. He had barely had time to catch his breath, to grasp the victory they had earned, and now this. It seemed like the shadows of the past were coming back to haunt them sooner than expected. Captain, gather the remaining soldiers. We need to get back to the fleet. Now. If it's another one of those creatures, we have no idea what we're dealing with this time. Vrax gave a sharp nod, his face hardening. Understood. We move out immediately. As the Deathworlders made their way back to the landing site, the sense of urgency in the air grew thick. The Zorathi, though still shaken, had begun to regroup, their warriors moving with a new purpose. The light of hope had returned to their eyes, albeit dimly. They were no longer alone, and for that, they were grateful. But Karak couldn't shake the feeling that their survival was no longer guaranteed. The true war was just beginning, and the enemy they had faced was only the first sign of something much darker. By the time they reached the ships, the fleet had already begun to prepare for what was coming. The massive ships hovered in the sky, their engines roaring to life, and every Deathworlder aboard was ready for the unknown. But Karak could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They were warriors, trained to fight and survive, but none of them had ever faced an enemy like this. The comms crackled again. This time, it wasn't a voice of distress. It was a chilling message from the fleet commander in orbit. General, we've identified it. It's not alone. There's an entire armada, an army of them, each larger than any ship we've ever encountered. And they're not stopping. They're coming for us. Karak's heart skipped a beat. The creature from the temple, the one they had fought so hard to contain, wasn't just a singular force. It had an army that had been waiting in the shadows, preparing for the moment when they would rise. Get us into orbit, now. Karak barked, his voice sharp with authority. We have no time to waste. The fleet shifted, and soon they were airborne, rising from the planet's surface, leaving the smoking ruins of the city behind them. But as they ascended, Karak's mind remained focused on the horizon, on the vast emptiness of space that stretched out before them. Somewhere, out there, an army was waiting. The message that had first drawn them to this planet, the desperate SOS from the Zorathi, had been a call for help, but it had also been a warning that the peace they had fought for was fragile, and that something far worse was on the move. The Vorlons had been just the beginning. And now, an entire army of these dark beings was closing in. Karak's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of alarms blaring throughout the fleet. The enemy was upon them, faster than anyone had predicted. The sensors were overloaded with incoming ships, the sheer mass of them staggering. Carrick's eyes widened as he saw the ships appear on the horizon. Thousands of them, each ship bristling with dark energy, moving as one, like a living wave. "Ready the fleet," Carrick said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "This is it. We fight, or we die." The fleet's cannons powered up, their weapons locking onto the incoming enemy. But Carrick knew that sheer firepower wouldn't be enough. They were facing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Whatever this new enemy was, it wasn't like the Vorlons. They had learned from the shadows, adapted, and now they were here, coming for revenge. The Deathworlders were no strangers to battle, but this was different. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight against an ancient force that had been unleashed from the depths of space itself. A force that was ready to consume everything in its path. But Carrick wasn't ready to surrender. The Deathworlders had faced the impossible before, and they would face it again. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin. And this time, they wouldn't just be fighting for a single planet. They would be fighting for the very future of the galaxy itself. Victory and reflection. The dark armada loomed in front of the Deathworlder fleet, a wall of death forged from the shadows themselves. Thousands of ships, each one larger and more menacing than the last, moved in perfect unison, their energy shields shimmering with ominous power. The fleet's sensors couldn't even register the full extent of the incoming threat. The enemy was not just an army. They were a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. General Carrick stood at the command center, his fingers tightly gripping the edge of the console. The tremor of fear that had once taken root in his heart had been replaced by a cold determination. His soldiers had seen horrors before, but nothing like this. The creatures they had fought on the ground, the ones they had contained in the depths of the Zorathi temple, were only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. And now, the puzzle was closing in on them. "We're facing an entire galaxy of shadows," Carrick said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the situation. "These things aren't just from another world. They're from a place beyond our understanding. And they're here to take everything we'd fought for." Captain Vrax, his face grim but resolute, stepped forward. "We've held the line before, General. We can do it again." But even Vrax's words didn't carry the same weight they once did. This was no ordinary battle. The fleet had survived wars, monster hunts, and alien invasions, but this was different. They were facing a threat unlike any they had ever encountered. The shadow creatures were not just beasts. They were ancient, powerful, and seemingly endless. And now, with the full might of their armada closing in, the Deathworlders had to find a way to end it, once and for all. The Zorathi, now aboard the fleet, had been eerily quiet since the battle at the temple. Their world was lost, their homes destroyed, and their people scattered. Yet there was still a flicker of hope in their eyes as they stood beside the Deathworlders, their warriors preparing to fight alongside the strongest force the galaxy had ever known. Carrick couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility. They had come here to save the Zorathi, but now it felt like they were fighting for the entire galaxy. "We need to hit them hard and fast," Carrick said, turning to his command staff. "We don't have the luxury of time. If we don't cripple their fleet now, they'll wipe us all out in the blink of an eye." The fleet's weapons powered up, but Carrick knew that firepower alone wouldn't win this battle. The creatures were too numerous, too adaptable. The Deathworlders had to strike at the heart of the enemy's strength, not just their ships. Suddenly, the fleet's sensors blared, warning of a massive energy surge from the enemy armada. It was happening faster than anyone could have predicted. The shadow creatures were unleashing their power, sending shockwaves across the entire system. The Deathworlder fleet's energy shields flickered as they absorbed the incoming force. "Prepare for impact," Carrick shouted. "All units, engage on my mark." The first blast of energy from the Shadow Armada struck with devastating force, shaking the Deathworlder ships to their core. But Carrick had anticipated this. With one swift command, he ordered the fleet to fire back, their weapons lighting up the sky with streams of energy. The battle had begun in earnest. As the ships collided, chaos erupted across the battlefield. The Deathworlders' weapons tore into the enemy ships, each explosion shaking the fabric of space itself. But the shadow creatures were not easily defeated. Their ships seemed to twist and adapt, absorbing the energy and returning it with even more destructive force. Carrick's mind raced. The Deathworlders were strong, but this enemy wasn't something they could destroy through sheer firepower alone. They needed a plan, a way to cripple the enemy's power source. It had become clear that these creatures were not just physical entities. They were manifestations of a darker force, a force that fed off the very fabric of the universe. Then, as the battle intensified, Carrick saw it. In the heart of the enemy armada, a massive flagship emerged, a gargantuan vessel, cloaked in shadows, its energy signature far more powerful than anything they had encountered. It was the source, the dark heart of the enemy's power. "We're going for the flagship," Carrick said, his voice a command filled with cold certainty. "All units, we break through the enemy lines. Full assault on that ship." The fleet charged forward, pushing through the waves of enemy ships, their weapons tearing into the shadows that seemed to surround them. The Deathworlders' ships were agile and strong, cutting through the darkness with precision, but it was the final strike that mattered. They had to cripple the flagship to stop the tide of shadows. The flagship's shields flared in defense, but Carrick's fleet had already made their move. With a concentrated burst of energy, they'd broke through the flagship's defenses. As the energy from their weapons slammed into the heart of the ship, Carrick felt the very air around him vibrate with the force of the explosion. For a brief moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The flagship faltered, its energy flickering, and then, with a deafening roar, it imploded, sending waves of energy through the battlefield. The shockwave ripped through the enemy armada, destabilizing their formation and causing their ships to disintegrate. The Deathworlder fleet had struck the heart of the enemy's power. The battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. The shadow creatures, their source destroyed, began to falter. Their once unbreakable unity fractured as their energy dissipated, leaving them vulnerable to the final assault. Carrick watched as the enemy ships, once formidable, began to collapse, their dark forms unraveling. The Deathworlders, pushing through the chaos, took advantage of the enemy's disarray, launching a final barrage that sent the last remnants of the armada scattering into space. Victory. But even as the battle ended and the shadows faded, Carrick knew that this victory was not without its cost. The Deathworlders had lost many in the battle. Their fleet had been damaged, their warriors wounded, but they had won. They had stopped an ancient evil from consuming the galaxy. As Carrick stood on the bridge, looking out at the remnants of the battlefield, he couldn't help but wonder what would come next. The galaxy was vast, and the shadows that had risen today were not the only dark forces lurking in the void. But for now, the Deathworlders had secured their place as the galaxy's greatest protectors. They had answered the call, they had faced the darkness, and they had emerged victorious. The galaxy was safe, for now, but the story was far from over.